Hey guys, welcome back to the Insides Guys channel where we do sales career coaching as well as experiences within the tech career. I'm Dave Roundtree, looking forward to getting into this. And we've got my man, Wole.
Hey, what's up, Dave? Hey, I'm Wole. As you can probably see, I'm in a little bit of a different environment. I'm actually on the road traveling for work. I'm talking to you from Seattle, Washington, and but hey, the show still has to go on.
Nice. I like it. Like that. Nice swanky room. Good. We'll talk about that, the travel life of tech sales. But we
Absolutely.
really are excited about having a special guest, Walter Benjamin. We've known Walter for 20 plus years, a long-term tech veteran. We're going to hear his life story about how he went to Singapore and then returned to the US. So his experiences there, what took him there, why did he even go to Singapore? Very interesting story. So we'll stay tuned for that. But first, if you have not subscribed, please hit that subscribe button, hit the like button. This is going to be a great story. Stay tuned.
All right, so let's kick it off. So, Walter, how you doing, man? It's been a while since I've seen you. How you been?
Hey, Wole. Hey, Dan, David. It's been a minute. It's been a minute. Miss you guys. We used to have a lot of fun working together.
Absolutely.
100%. Yeah. So Walter, as we get started here, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from. Just let us know a little bit about you.
Um, I'm a New York City kid, right? Born and bred in New York. Grew up in the Bronx. Went to school there. Um, Most people know me from my days playing sports and chess and everything, little league, everything you can name under the sun. I was a good bowler. I just hung out, growing up in New York like everyone else does.
Many passions and interests. I like that.
Yep.
What about tech? Talk about how you got into tech.
Yeah, tech is interesting. I think a lot of it goes to a lot of my formative years, probably when I was about 9, maybe 10 years old. I think we all remember, typing up the Lemonade game, right? And getting on those Commodore 64s and such. But I had a cousin, uh, Ricky. He was into Macs, and I'd go over his house. He lived down in Tennessee, and so I'd go see him, during the summer or really during the Christmas holidays. And it was nonstop playing video games and getting into the Mac world. And I remember, he would build different, he would take parts his Mac at the time and add new RAM and all sorts of kind of components to it as such. And so I got firsthand experience just, learning how to do stuff, from a hardware perspective to coding and hacking and everything.
So Walter, tell me a little bit about how you even got into going overseas to take a role or to pursue your career. How did that even come up? Was that a process? Did somebody approach you? When we met you, you were working in New York. Yes, you were a traveling guy and always traveling and engaging with customers. But tell us a little bit about how you got to go overseas and what that looked like.
I think a lot of that story really begins at an early age. I was very close to my grandmother, my nana, and she always used to say, some people, some women especially like their diamonds. Some women like their furs. For her, she always liked to travel. And so when I was 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, it was nothing for her to grab me, take me away from my parents. And I'd been on so many different trips to the islands, to other places throughout the United States with her, and so she instilled that travel bug in me
Mm.
very much in an early age. I always loved to travel. Got to go to different places in this hemisphere, right, in North America and Canada, down to South America and Mexico, places like that, certainly the islands. But I always wanted to do more, and so she always gave me that vision, and she used to do these boat rides, these cruises around the world, and I was
Oh,
always
wow.
jealous.
Right.
So it was always amazing for her. You got to remember when I was 9, 10 years old too, I had an aunt who did some traveling. She worked for ExxonMobil, so she was big in the oil and gas and did security for it. And so she would be leaving out of New York or Washington D.C., whatever it took her, and she spent a lot of time overseas. And she'd come back and land. It was always a late night flight, and my mom would cook dinner for her, and she'd sit there at the table, and she'd tell me these amazing stories about
Uh-huh.
where she was in places like Indonesia and Malaysia, and certainly Singapore. And I remember one trip she specifically brought back those Casio digital diaries. And again, 9, 10-year-old kid, I'm looking at this thing. It was like a typewriter, but it was, electronic. It has its own little display. And
Yeah.
it was a big gift for me at that time. And,
Yeah, yeah.
and I was just
Sounds like
amazed
you put
about
the bug in your head early. You got
she
that.
did.
Yeah.
So I got like she just told me, oh, they have all the latest and greatest, electronics, and I was just like, wow. And she was telling me about how the streets are clean everywhere you go, and how people are so nice to you, and I just always thought one day I'm going to go to Singapore,
One day
and
you're gonna do it.
yes,
That's interesting because as African American, a lot of us are not exposed to travel early on. So that got you kind of thinking much more globally and internationally, and it really parlayed into your career. Because ever since Wole and I have known you, you've had a role where you are traveling international and
Mhm.
going to different countries for
We did
customers.
some trips together way back in the day, right?
That's true. That's absolutely true. Yeah, we were. Let's just recount real quick. So we were in Tokyo together.
We went to
Um,
Tokyo twice, I think, together.
Right. And then I came to Singapore where you were there, and then we went to Malaysia for
Yes,
yeah, for that
I
conference.
missed those trips.
Yes. Well, you
you
got plenty of trips in, well, like we can't we don't feel sorry for you. Yeah, those are good days. So going back to what kind of got you thinking about Singapore, tell me this, so how did that come up? Specifically taking a role in Singapore.
For me, we used to get these annual surveys within the company each year, and they talk about, would you see yourself, working a little bit longer here at the company? Do you see yourself here for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, things of that nature? What would keep you? Those type of things. And I remember working in New York, and a lot of people at that time, they took a job at the company, but they were really looking to get a payday, get a 30, 40% boost working on some other company down on Wall Street as such. But I liked the environment we were working in. I liked the atmosphere. I had a great boss at the time, guy by the name of Ian. And so, for me, I sort of myself wanted to extend my career there. But I thought about, okay, if I did, what would make a difference? And I remember one time we were at one of those sales conferences during the summertime, and you see the different teams that get on stage from around the world, and Germany and Brazil, and
Yeah, I remember
you
that.
know,
Yeah.
and they went to Australia, and I got a chance to hang out with some of those folks at some of the parties and such, and I would just I would inquire like, what's going on? How's business out done over there and such, and so I just said in my mind like, hey, if I'm going to stay here in the company a little bit longer, I'd want to get a different experience. At that time, I'd already, gotten a couple of promotions in my current role, and had tried, I don't know, 3, 4 different roles, doing different things. Always these stretch assignments, finding new ways to help cover and drive new, business for the organization. Um, but I wanted to do something that was just completely different, and I felt like I needed to just sort of break away from where I was in New York and be there, right? And so you were right. In my role, I was in a global role. I had a chance to travel in support of my customer, and
And
I
this
had
was at
been
while you
to
were at Microsoft, just so everyone understands. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. This is when I was at Microsoft. They were just starting up what they call the Global Accounts Organization, and I got a chance to go to so many different places in Europe and South America, and certainly in Canada and Mexico, and then I started doing some
Well,
travel overseas in Asia. And I noticed that there was a real difference in the interactions that I was having with my customers, right? And um, it was more personable, right? It was more about finding ways that you can have mutual success here. And I always felt like if I could just stay a little bit longer, right, and have us more of a
Mm,
sustained relationship, we could do so much more. And I was at a global accounts summit. I think we were up in Vancouver at the time, and somebody who was waving at one of the folks on my team, and she's like, "I got to go over and see Brian." She's like, "Oh, you should come with me." And we came over there, and I plopped down next to Brian, and we just started chatting the whole night. He was a funny guy from Australia, and he was just telling me about, where how long he had been at the company there in Australia, but he had just moved over and taken over that enterprise partner group there in Singapore. And we started talking. I said, "Well, tell me more about Singapore." And he could see that my eyes
okay.
just get really big.
Yeah.
He says, "I'm going to do a session tomorrow. You should come sit in on it, and you can learn a little bit more." And I was like, I sat around for another hour, and we just stayed in contact. And so by the time
Networking. You were
it's
networking with them.
networking,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
definitely networking, and
Yeah.
and after 12 o'clock is the best networking. Sometimes so I talked to a couple of managers. They say, "You're serious?" I was like, "Yeah." And it's like, "Okay, I'm gonna write this down and make sure we see if it can happen." And lo and behold, about 3, 4 months later, it came up as an opportunity. They talked to me first about Amsterdam.
Yeah.
And I said, Amsterdam's fun, cool. I've been to Paris, Amsterdam's all good, but um, I'm kind of interested in Asia. They're like, really? But this is where the money's good. We could grow a lot more, and we want you here. And I was like, I'll wait a little bit longer. So, literally about 2, 3 more months later, I had to wait, and an opportunity did come up. And they talked to me about, hey, do you want to be in Hong Kong? Do you want to be in Australia? Do you want to be in
Wow.
Japan, or
Take your pick.
Singapore? And that's what it was. And I said, you know
Yeah.
what? I'm interested in Singapore. And that was RHQ for the company, right? So that made a lot of sense. And so I did my interviews
And
with the team.
RHQ is regional headquarters.
Regional headquarters, yeah. So Singapore was great for me, right? Many consider Singapore to be Asia on training wheels, right?
How was it leaving your family? Right.
Yeah.
Yes, you had family that traveled, but your core was here in the US. So your family, your friends, you don't have anything
Your
in
neighborhood,
Singapore yet,
everything.
right?
Yeah.
So how did you what was going through your mind, right, before you left? You accepted the position, you're excited about it, but you're leaving everything that you really know.
I was young, um, and I was having fun in my career, and I just kept on, seeing that as sort of just a continuation of it. That was the next step. And I fortunately had family that was very supportive, right? I wasn't married. I didn't have any kids, so I didn't have, that nuclear family that travel overseas. That would have been different
Mhm.
if I was going to make
Right.
that type of
Right.
decision. I did have my parents. I did have my aunties and uncles and cousins and such. Even my grandmother, right? She was getting up there in age, but I was fortunate. I was at an event in New York, and just so happened that my mom was there. My cousin Ricky, who I mentioned earlier today, being instrumental in my tech interests, he was there with his mom, right? Because our moms grew up together. Um, and then they had a third friend, and I had never met Miss Cynthia Robinson before, but
Mm.
Cynthia, my mom, and my aunt Flo all went to Fisk University together, and they were there to, celebrating. And that was my first time meeting Aunt Cynthia, and she went to work for IBM. So she's one of
Okay.
the old, one of the early people that worked in IBM. She actually holds a couple of patents on the mainframe and such. When she learned that I worked for Microsoft, she's like, "Oh, that's so wonderful." They told her that I had just went through all my interview cycle, and they're offering me a position for me to take a role in Singapore. And she's like, "Oh my gosh, you have to go." And so
Okay.
she basically ran interference on my mom.
Okay.
Who didn't want you to go probably, right?
I was going to get that guilt trip one way or another, right? But
Yeah.
go do it, and you're going to learn so much more, not only professionally but personally as well.
Yeah.
Cool.
So Walter, I want you to take me back to, when you first moved over there, the very beginning, when you first think about that first trip over, that first flight. Um, I can identify with this. In a previous episode, I talked about, I moved overseas. I moved to Istanbul, Turkey. And so I remember those first days, weeks, months in a foreign country. Take me back to that time for you when you first moved to Singapore. You just mentioned you left your parents and your family behind. You're moving to a new country that you didn't really know, a new role. How did you feel? Take us through that time and how you were feeling and what you experienced in those early days.
Um, it was a little mixed feelings, right? I was working on one of the best teams back in New York and um, within the global accounts group. We were high powered, worked hard, played hard, right? And we got a lot of business done. We grew our account by 3x. And I saw a future there in terms of things that I was doing, um, growing there. I had multiple roles, both pre-sales as well as sales. I was carrying the bag as well, and then I knew the opportunity. We had a half I don't know $1 billion deal on the table with the customer and such that I architected.
And then,
Um,
Walter, let me interrupt you. You said carrying a bag. Now that has a different meaning today, right? When a young person says, I had the bag." So, what do you mean by you were carrying a bag?
so yeah, for when I first started with Microsoft, I was in a what they call a technology specialist role. I did both a product technology specialist role as well as an account technology specialist role. Um, in that time, I also had a couple of other roles like a compete. I was also a solution sales specialist. I was also carrying the bag. I was leading all, negotiations
You,
and
you were you were the
uh,
top salesperson.
I was the
And you
top
carried a sales
salesperson,
quota. Yeah,
and
a
I carried
sales
a sales
quota.
quota.
Yeah, that
Yes,
bag usually refers to you have a sales quota. So there's a number that you've got to attain each year in revenue.
correct,
Yeah,
And we
correct.
have on one of our earlier episodes, Dave and I broke down in a generic way what technology sales looks like and the different types
hmm
of roles. And so some of the roles that Walter mentioned, we talk about. So if you're new in tech or you're thinking about a career in technology sales, watch that episode and
Yeah, I put a link up top.
absolutely. So Walter, take me back. So you were talking about you. I guess what you were alluding to is you were leaving a very good team in your old role, and so now you're moving to a new country, and so I want to hear about like what you stepped into from a work perspective, but also talk about again how when you made that transition when you moved on a personal level what you were experiencing.
Yeah, so I had a lot of success in New York. I had a lot of people there, you know, um, to support me as well. I had a strong network that I was building, not only in New York but stateside, and then here I am going off to Asia. So I'm leaving something that was very safe.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
but again, going back to my early days, I had that adventuresome spirit. I wanted to do something new. I wanted to travel. I wanted to see part of the world. I wanted to see what business was like overseas, and
Yeah.
it's very different, from say Singapore to Japan to Australia, and they're all very different, culturally. But in terms of how you negotiate things too,
Yeah.
it was a good learning experience for me. So I remember being on the plane, to your point, and we're traveling over in business class and such, and I'm literally sitting next to a gentleman who was an MP, a Minister of Parliament for Singapore, and he started asking me questions like, and I was like, yeah, it's my first time going to Singapore. He's like, and you're gonna be working for this company? I was like, yeah, and he's like, oh, okay, and no family with you? Like, no, no, by myself and such. And so he gave me a lot of good advice, not only professionally but personally, like just to say, you'll um, be an attractive target for a lot of people.
We're going to get to that in a little bit.
um, so yeah, it was just giving me some advice about pacing yourself and keeping your awareness about you. So
Mm.
it was very good. I remember landing in
Sounds
Singapore.
like a very auspicious start, right? So you have a member of parliament telling you that good things are ahead. So
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and I remember landing in Singapore and um, getting picked up.
Was this
Uh,
your first time in you took the job before you actually went to Singapore? Am I getting
site.
that correct?
Well, I will say this. I told my boss, I was like, listen, I've never been there. I've heard a lot of stories about it from when I was little, but I need to at least be there to make sure it's going to be a good fit for me. And
right.
so they were able to fund me to have a look-see visit.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I was able to go over there for 3, 4 days and to
Okay.
meet my colleagues in person, people who are on the immediate team, on some of the regional team, and get a sense of how living would be over there. So they were able to fund that for
Okay.
me. That was
Okay.
and that all happened on that first trip. So I remember landing there, and I think I flew out on a Friday night. So you land there, it's late Saturday and such. It's already after midnight, and I was going to go to my hotel, and they're like, "You sure we could take you over here?" There, because the city's jumping at that
Take you
time of
where?
night.
Where do they want to take you, Walter?
They wanted to take me to different clubs, to different, places where people hang out and just,
Wow.
go out and drink. So in
Interact with the
Singapore,
city.
exactly.
So I
There's
guess I guess I guess that's what we would call starting off strong. That's good.